She didn't raise her voice. She didn't break any rules. She simply stepped forward, boarding pass in hand, and within 60 seconds, 2 security officers were called. No one shouted. But the message was clear. You don't belong here. What they didn't know was that the woman they quietly tried to remove was the only person in the country who could shut their airline down. So the question is, what happens when the one they tried to silence turns out to be the final signature they need? Let me take you inside a story where power didn't arrive with noise, but with documents, data, and a silence that rewrote the rules. They called security on her before she even said a word. No warning, no explanation. Just 2 officers summoned like backup, walking straight toward a black woman standing in line with a first-class boarding pass in her hand. Simone Jackson, 47. Legal advisor to one of the largest aviation firms in the country. Calm posture, pressed suit, platinum luggage tag glinting under the terminal lights. The gate agent didn't even glance at her ticket. Didn't need to. "Ma'am, step aside." That was all. 4 words spoken with the kind of finality usually reserved for trespassers, not travelers. She didn't argue, didn't raise her voice, just turned and followed, shoulders square, lips pressed. But as she stepped out of line, something else shifted. Not in the room, in the silence. Because no one protested. No one even looked surprised. An older couple 2 rows back glanced away politely. A man in a navy blazer lowered his eyes and pretended to check his phone. It was as if everyone had quietly agreed that she didn't quite belong there. Not with that skin. Not with that silence. Not in that line. Harold Green, 71, who once worked air traffic out of Atlanta, watched it all unfold from his seat by the window. Same uniform, he'd later tell his daughter. Same tone, it never really changed. He'd been told to step aside too once, back in 1973, because someone didn't believe a black man had any business being on the control tower floor during a system outage. But this felt colder, because Simone didn't make a scene. She didn't need to. Her presence already was one. As she waited by the kiosk, the man behind her in line, white, mid-50s, loud golf shirt, was waved through without a glance. Didn't even show his ID. Simone saw it, so did Harold. And so did the cameras, though no one yet knew how much that footage would matter later. Still, the room stayed quiet, professional. The boarding line moved on. The world moved on. But something had been marked, because what no one realized, not the agent who dismissed her, not the supervisor smirking by the podium, not the passengers politely ignoring her, was that Simone wasn't just another first-class traveler. She was the reason that first class still existed. She hadn't come to fly. She'd come to finalize. And in her briefcase, held tight beneath her coat, were the final documents in a $4.1 billion airline merger. Her signature was the last one missing. The last voice in the room, the one they didn't recognize. Yet, they let her through. No fanfare. No explanation. Just a subtle nod from the same gate agent who had called security minutes earlier, as if the whole thing had never happened. Simone Jackson didn't ask questions. She had learned long ago that questions from people like her rarely led to answers, just longer delays. She walked down the jet bridge in silence, each step steady, controlled. Her coat crisp. The document envelope pressed close to her ribs, like a reminder. Stay composed. Stay focused. You're here for a reason. As she stepped into the cabin, the atmosphere shifted again, just slightly. Enough for anyone who's ever felt it before to know exactly what it was. The flight attendant at the door had been warm just seconds earlier. A handshake. A joke. A coat hung carefully for the man ahead of her. But when Simone reached the threshold, the attendant's expression cooled into practiced neutrality. No smile, no greeting. Her eyes flicked to Simone's ticket, then to her face, then down again. "Seat?" the attendant asked flatly. "1A, Simone answered, already knowing she'd have to repeat it. The woman pointed left without a word. No offer to help with her bag. No acknowledgement of her class of service. Just a gesture that said, quietly but clearly, "Get to where you're supposed to be." Simone didn't miss a beat. She moved forward, her heels clicking softly on the carpet. Every movement deliberate. Her father used to say, "In rooms like that, how you walk is louder than what you say." Margaret Ellis, 72, knows that lesson well. She spent 3 decades teaching American history in a high school that had only recently desegregated when she arrived. She once told her students, they'll never call you out loud, but they'll always have a way to make you feel other. That's what Simone felt now. She reached her seat, first row window, and placed her briefcase down gently. As she adjusted the strap, a man already seated in 1B gave her a glance. Then a pause. Then a frown. "Is this full?" he asked. Simone gave a polite nod. Moments later, the man pressed the call button. When the attendant arrived, he leaned in and whispered something. She smiled, nodded, and disappeared. 2 minutes later, another crew member arrived with a clipboard. "Miss Jackson?" she asked, though her tone suggested she already knew. "We're doing a routine cabin weight review. Would you mind stepping aside so we can verify seating balance?" Simone looked her square in the eye. "I'm within the weight requirements for this seat, and I'm not moving." The woman blinked, hesitated, then offered a tight-lipped smile. "Of course, thank you." She walked away. Simone stayed where she was. The curtain to economy hadn't even closed yet, but the lines had already been drawn. Next came the random security check. A male attendant approached, this time with a scanning device. "Just need to confirm your ID and boarding group. TSA protocol," he said. Simone handed him her pre-check ID, her boarding pass, and a business card that read, "Senior Legal Counsel, Meridian Holdings." He looked at it, then again, then returned everything without another word. Raymond Tucker, now 65, once oversaw compliance investigations for a major shipping company. Watching the video later that week, he'd point out how clean the crew's actions looked. No raised voices, no overt hostility. "It's smart," he said. "They don't break the rules, they stretch them, just far enough to make someone feel small." Simone folded her coat over her lap and rested her hands on it. Calm, still. Not because she felt calm, but because she refused to give them anything else to interpret. Every skipped glance, every clipped tone, every extra second of silence. It was all part of the same quiet choreography. No one had said she didn't belong. They didn't have to. The plane ascended into a clear blue sky, slicing through clouds that looked soft but held no comfort. Simone Jackson sat still in seat 1A, her tray table up, seatbelt buckled, coat neatly folded on her lap. She had flown dozens of times before. Often in first class, often alone, but rarely had the altitude made the silence feel so close. Service began with a practiced rhythm. A second flight attendant moved down the aisle with towels, neatly folded and tucked with tongues. She served the man in 1B with a smile and nod, turned to 1C with the same warmth. When she reached Simone, she paused, not in thought but in decision, then continued walking. No towel, no explanation, just a missed beat in the routine. Simone didn't ask, she never did. Moments later, the drink cart arrived. Champagne for 1C, a mimosa for 1B. "What would you like, ma'am?" the attendant finally asked, her voice as neutral as a gate sign. "Still water," Simone replied. The attendant blinked. "I'm sorry. Beverage service isn't included in your ticket class." Simone met her eyes, then glanced down at the leather seat she was sitting in. "First class. Row 1. Printed name on the manifest. Before she could respond, the attendant added, "I can bring you water after we finish the main cabin." Simone didn't argue. She simply said, "I'll wait." Margaret Ellis had seen that look before, not on a plane, but at a pharmacy in Ohio in 1979. The man behind the counter had smiled at her husband, but handed her the receipt like a formality. Polite racism, she called it. It's got good posture and clean fingernails. Simone leaned back and closed her eyes, but the quiet didn't last. Half an hour into the flight, a man from 2 rows back walked up to use the restroom. On his way back, he stopped by Simone's row and looked at her, not in greeting, but in audit. "Excuse me," he said. "Are you sure you're in the right seat?" Simone opened her eyes slowly. "I am." He didn't respond, just gave a tight nod and walked on. The flight attendant reappeared a moment later, lips pressed tight. "Is everything okay here?" Simone didn't answer, not with words, just turned her head toward the window. Raymond Tucker, watching this footage later, said that's the thing about power. The people who don't have it think it's loud. But the people who do, they know silence speaks louder. Another hour passed. Meal service came and went. She wasn't offered a choice, only told, "We're out of the chicken option." Her seatmate, who had boarded after her, had both entrees placed before him. At 30,000 feet, the rules are different. There are no raised voices, just selective courtesy. They skipped her again when collecting trash, again when offering dessert, And each time, she said nothing. But her silence wasn't surrender, it was observation. The envelope beneath her coat remained untouched, sealed, protected, waiting. And the names of every crew member, every time-stamped omission, every unnecessary check were already starting to form a pattern. Not because she was keeping score, but because someone would ask. And this time, she would answer with evidence. The landing was smooth, textbook, the kind that lets everyone pretend the journey was uneventful. Passengers stood, stretched, gathered bags. Conversations started up again, about dinner plans, connecting flights, meetings that couldn't be missed. Simone Jackson stayed seated, not out of hesitation, out of clarity. She had no connection to catch, no timeline to follow. She knew what came next. As the aisle emptied, a voice called from behind her. "Miss Jackson, could you step aside for a moment?" It wasn't a question. Two airport security officers waited at the end of the jet bridge, arms crossed, badges visible. No urgency, no accusations, just the same practiced calm that had followed her since the first checkpoint. Raymond Tucker had seen that look before, too, on the faces of compliance investigators when they were about to question someone they hadn't done enough homework on. Protocol was the word they always used when they didn't want to say suspicion. Simone followed without resistance. They led her to a side lounge, quiet, sterile, lined with tinted windows and muted tones. A woman in a navy blazer waited there, holding a tablet and a file folder. "There seems to be a discrepancy with your travel history," she said. "A flagged pattern from international entries. We'll need to ask you a few questions." Simone didn't flinch. She opened her briefcase with a soft click. From inside, she withdrew a leather portfolio, then a badge, platinum inlay, embossed seal. The room shifted. The woman with the file folder blinked twice, looked down at the ID, then back at Simone. Simone placed a second item on the table, a document titled Meridian Holdings, Final Review Authority. "I'm here on behalf of Meridian's legal division. My presence was logged, my identity pre-cleared, my authority," she paused. Absolute. Silence. Then movement. The officers glanced at each other. One stepped back. The woman in the blazer reached for her earpiece, murmuring something indistinct. Simone remained still, not triumphant, just centered. Because this was never about confrontation, it was about being misread, misplaced. Again. And this time, she wasn't carrying luggage, she was carrying consequence. Margaret Ellis, who had seen more hearings than vacations in her years on the school board, once said, "People don't fear your voice. They fear the moment they realize you've been listening longer than they have." That's exactly what was happening now. In that silent room, all the skipped service, the passive doubts, the unspoken, "you don't belong here" became irrelevant. Because the woman they'd quietly questioned was the one person in the country who could stop their company's biggest deal in a decade. Not out of revenge, not out of spite, out of principle. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't pointed fingers. She just placed one more item on the table, a letter of intent, unsigned. The final document required to approve a $4.1 billion airline merger. Every word on that page was binding. Every signature line was blank, except hers. Nothing exploded. No headlines broke. The world outside the terminal kept spinning. But inside one quiet data room in Terminal C, something began to shift. Simone Jackson sat alone with a secure console. She removed a small device from her briefcase, no larger than a thumb drive, and inserted it into the system's encrypted port. Her fingerprint verified, her face scanned. The screen blinked, then unlocked. Compliance override. Access granted. This was not public power. Not the kind that yells into microphones or appears on magazine covers. This was structural authority, designed not to impress, but to correct. And today it was doing exactly that. She opened the incident file, labeled only Gate 12A, discrepancy flagged. Within seconds, every system tied to her itinerary lit up. Entry logs from the initial TSA clearance, security footage from the check-in counter, audio from the gate agent's microphone, internal timestamps from the boarding system, cabin service manifests, each one layered over the other, building not just a timeline, but a pattern. She didn't need to type much. A single flag initiated cross-division review. Every event involving her name was locked from deletion. Every staff ID that interacted with her was pulled into a rolling investigation, and then she made one last entry. Merger authorization, on hold. Reason, internal conduct review pending. In less than 4 minutes, a ripple passed through 3 organizations. It started small, a ping to the Director of Internal Compliance, then up the chain to legal, then executive strategy. And by the end of the hour, a red notice sat quietly at the top of the CEO's personal inbox. No one was fired. Not yet. That wasn't Simone's role. But a system had been activated that could no longer look away. Harold Green, now retired, once described it best. The military taught us not to raise our voices, but to write things down. Because paper lasts longer than shouting. Simone was never there to yell. She was there to write it down. The investigation that followed moved quietly, like a river under ice. But it was thorough. The lead flight attendant, Lena Brooks, had 6 prior minor complaints, all marked unfounded. But when overlaid with Simone's case, a pattern of selective service appeared. The gate agent who called security had no formal reprimands, but facial recognition from security footage showed she waved through 5 white passengers without checking their IDs, directly before Simone was stopped. The crew member who skipped Simone during beverage service had submitted a cabin report that claimed Row 1A declined service. But the onboard recording captured Simone's actual response. "Still water, please," followed by the attendant's reply, "Not included in your ticket class." It wasn't explosive, it was undeniable. Raymond Tucker, who once oversaw ethics compliance at a national logistics firm, reviewed the case months later as part of a corporate consultancy panel. The beauty of it, he said, was how little Simone had to say. She didn't accuse, she recorded. That's power with discipline. Discipline had consequences. Lena Brooks was suspended from international service and placed on extended re-evaluation. Her travel privileges were frozen pending diversity and conduct retraining. The gate agent was transferred to a non-customer-facing role with probation. The second attendant received a written warning, and her performance review score was downgraded from meets expectations to under concern. There was no press conference, no apology email sent to Simone, but every single name involved in the incident found themselves moved. Quietly, permanently. And the real shift wasn't in discipline, it was in policy. Within 3 weeks, the airline issued a soft internal memo, unassuming in tone, clinical in format, but groundbreaking in content. All customer interactions involving security referrals must be tagged with real-time justification. All service discrepancies flagged by premium seat holders to be auto-reviewed by AI after flight closure. Cabin crew required to complete scenario-based bias training within 60 days. It wasn't change with a banner. It was change baked into the system. And it only happened because one woman, who had every right to be angry, chose instead to be precise. Margaret Ellis, when she read about it in her community legal circle, folded the printout quietly and said, "This is what justice looks like after 60. Not fire, just light." Simone didn't follow up. She didn't need to. Her job had never been to punish. It was to ensure that next time someone like her boards a plane, no clipboard, no headset, no polite smile can erase what the system now remembers. There was no press release, no public memo, no executive apology crafted by a PR firm. But somewhere deep in the airline's legal division, an audit file was opened, and unlike most, this one had a living witness at its center. Her name, Simone Jackson. Her role, final verifier for a $4.1 billion merger. Her request, none. She hadn't filed a complaint, hadn't threatened litigation, hadn't contacted the media. She had simply flagged the system, and the system, when forced to look at itself, could no longer look away. The internal audit began quietly. 5 departments were notified. IT pulled 3 months of gate entry footage across the busiest airports. Legal requested incident logs for all random checks issued to premium-class black travelers within the last 18 months. Security analysts ran comparison data. The numbers weren't explosive, but they were consistent. The audit team found that travelers of color in premium cabins were flagged for additional verification at 3.4 times the rate of their white counterparts. In nearly 87% of cases, no formal violation or discrepancy was ever documented. It wasn't policy, it wasn't malicious, it was habit. Raymond Tucker, when briefed on the findings as part of an external compliance board, said it plainly. No one thinks they're discriminating, they just think they're being thorough, with the wrong people, again and again. But what made this audit different wasn't the data, it was the footage. Gate 12A, security cam. 11:07 a.m. Simone steps forward, holding her ID and boarding pass. The gate agent, without looking, tilts her head toward the two uniformed officers standing just out of frame. No words, just a nod. The timestamp is logged. 11:08 a.m. The agent waves through a white male passenger behind Simone without scanning his ID. 11:09 a.m. Simone is pulled aside. Cabin camera. Seat 1A. 12:33 p.m. Simone asks, "Still water, please." Flight attendant replies, "That's not included in your ticket class." Another frame. Seconds later, the man in 1C is offered orange juice and champagne, unprompted. These images were never shown to the public, but they didn't need to be. Because within that audit team, diverse, experienced, trained to recognize patterns, something began to shift. Not anger, not outrage, responsibility. Harold Green, who'd spent 30 years running logistics for cross-state military airfields, once told his team, "A system doesn't fix itself because it feels guilty. It fixes itself when the consequences become internal." And this time, they were. Simone's override didn't just pause a merger. It forced a mirror into a space where mirrors had long been absent. Each department involved was now required to submit a review protocol. Why wasn't the original screening flagged as excessive? Why did 2 service reports contradict flight recordings? Why did the cabin log show passenger declined beverage when footage clearly showed otherwise? Not one person shouted. But the paper trail began to shout for them. By week 3, the ripple reached Meridian Holdings. One executive wrote privately, "We didn't hire Simone to protect our passengers. We hired her to protect our investments." Turns out she's done both. What followed was subtle but absolute. 2 new compliance officers were placed on the airline's premium boarding team. The gate agent's scheduling algorithm was revised to include implicit bias flagging. Onboard cabin logs were updated to sync automatically with in-flight camera review. No one had demanded this, but the system, having been forced to watch itself, couldn't deny what it saw. And Simone never followed up, not out of disinterest, but because what needed to happen was already happening. Without her voice. Margaret Ellis, upon hearing the full report during a church committee luncheon, laid her fork down and said softly, "Sometimes the Lord doesn't need you to fight. He just needs you to stand still long enough for the truth to find its own legs." Simone had done exactly that. She didn't record her own defense. She recorded the system's behavior. And when it was replayed to the people who built that system, they realized, some for the first time, that accountability wasn't an outside threat. It was an inside response. There was no press conference, no televised apology, no corporate email leaked to the media. But within 3 weeks, a memo circulated internally through the airline's crew scheduling system. Subject line: Route reassignments, Q3 adjustments. It looked like any other quarterly notice, just a shuffle of names, routes, and time blocks. But those who paid attention knew what they were looking at. Lena Brooks, senior flight attendant for Premium International Service, had been moved. No longer Paris, no longer Tokyo, no longer even the transcontinental LAX JFK loop. Instead, Pittsburgh to Orlando, 5 days a week, economy only. The kind of route reserved for new hires and disciplinary probation. No one said it aloud, but everyone who worked in the system understood. This wasn't reassignment, it was a reckoning, not fiery, not loud, but unmistakable. Harold Green, now retired but still connected through union circles, heard about it through a friend in Atlanta. "They don't put you on Orlando flights in the middle of summer unless they want you to feel it," he said. "You're not just moved, you're reminded." Simone Jackson didn't request this outcome. But the system she activated had its own way of closing the loop. She wasn't interested in punishment. That was never her role. She believed in consequence. Quiet, professional, irrefutable. And this one came dressed in company uniform, with revised duty hours and a stripped-back service cart. Lena read the reassignment line on her portal alone. No manager present, no chance to argue. She stared at it for nearly a full minute, hand resting on her mouse, unmoving. Not because she didn't understand, but because she did. That week, she arrived at her new gate 10 minutes early. She didn't speak to the newer crew members, didn't brief the cart with the usual flair, didn't correct a trainee's placement of the meal trays. She worked the flight, did her job, kept her smile, but it was quieter than usual. Margaret Ellis, speaking about it later with her niece who worked in aviation HR, simply said, "When you're used to being at the top, even eye level feels like punishment." And Lena wasn't alone. The gate agent from Flight 12A was reassigned as well, moved to overnight baggage routing, a shift with no passenger interaction, no customer conflict, and no upward trajectory. She didn't complain, because what would she say? That the system had reviewed her behavior and decided she needed a different kind of desk? There was nothing to protest. No one had scolded her. But the silence in which she now worked spoke louder than any reprimand. Raymond Tucker, reviewing final notes for the Oversight Board, penned one sentence that summed it up best. "Sometimes justice isn't a spotlight. It's a relocation notice sent at 2:07 a.m. Simone never commented publicly. She was never interviewed. But in corporate halls and quiet crew lounges, her name began to carry a different kind of weight, not as a threat, but as a threshold. A reminder that the person you dismiss could be the one holding the final pen. A reminder that silence doesn't mean weakness. It means waiting, watching, and knowing exactly when to act. It happened not in a boardroom, not at a press table, but in the quiet hallway of the executive terminal at JFK. A space lined with soft carpet, oil paintings, and the kind of silence that only high-level deals and private flights could afford. Simone Jackson had just finalized the last adjustment to the merger contract. Her signature was dry. The folder was sealed. As she turned toward the lounge exit, she saw Lena Brooks walking in from the other side. Not in uniform. Civilian clothes, hair tied back, a small clipboard in her hand, no longer greeting passengers but helping with paperwork transfers for crew assignments. Their eyes met. Lena stopped walking. Simone didn't. Not until she reached her. There was no crowd, no camera. Just two women in a hallway where status was usually unspoken but always understood. Lena opened her mouth, maybe to apologize, maybe to explain. But Simone raised her hand gently to stop her. "No need," she said, voice low but steady. "I'm not here to take anything from you." She looked past Lena toward the windows where a corporate jet was being prepped for takeoff. Then back at her. "I know what it's like to not be seen," Simone continued, "to be treated like someone in the wrong place." Lena's eyes fell to the floor. "But you were wrong about me," Simone said. "I didn't come here to fit in first class." She paused, let the silence settle. "I came here to buy it." It wasn't arrogance. It wasn't revenge. It was reality. Not because Simone needed the validation, but because the room needed the correction. Margaret Ellis, hearing the story secondhand through a friend at Union headquarters, would later describe it like this. She didn't just walk back in the room. She walked the room back into alignment. Lena didn't respond. She didn't argue. There was nothing left to say. Because in that one sentence, Simone had laid bare the entire arc. From suspicion at the gate, to humiliation in the cabin, to quiet retaliation through protocol, to control of the very system that once denied her a towel and a glass of water. She didn't gloat. She didn't raise her voice. She reclaimed her place. And more than that, she redrew the line for everyone who would walk through that terminal after her. Raymond Tucker would later write in a leadership journal, "The true shift doesn't happen when the powerful get louder. It happens when the overlooked begin to speak in complete sentences, with position, not volume." Simone walked past Lena without another word, calm, focused. Her driver stood waiting by the glass doors. No clipboard, no confirmation, just a nod. He already knew who she was. She stepped into the black sedan and disappeared into the early evening light. No one clapped, but the hallway remained still for long after she left. And the weight of that sentence, "I came here to buy it," would echo in more than one meeting room for years to come. Back at Meridian Holdings, the legal department received a final update from Simone Jackson. It wasn't a summary, it wasn't an explanation, it was a revision. One clause inserted halfway through the merger agreement in clean, silent text. All merger contingent partners must demonstrate quarterly anti-bias audit compliance for executive-level staff and frontline personnel. No press release accompanied it, no tweet, no staged signing ceremony. But in the world of billion-dollar deals, that one clause was louder than any interview. It meant, "We've seen what you didn't think we'd see, and now it's written into the system." The CEO of the airline didn't call Simone. He didn't need to. He received a one-line email, subject merger finalized. Message: Jackson has signed. Updated terms in effect immediately. There was no celebration, just a reshuffling of legal teams, a quiet meeting in the 19th floor conference room, and a red line document circulated to all department heads. They all understood. The incident wasn't an outlier, it was a mirror. And the merger hadn't just cost money, it had cost comfort. The kind of comfort that lets people assume they'll never be questioned. Simone had questioned them, without ever raising her voice. Raymond Tucker, in his final memo to the Oversight Board, wrote, "Power doesn't announce itself, it corrects the room without stepping on a chair." In the months that followed, several quiet changes occurred. A full-time ethics officer was embedded within the airline's premium service division. All gate agents were required to complete a new training program titled Assumption and Access: How We Unsee People. First-class cabins were fitted with auto-logging software that compared service logs with recorded footage, looking not for mistakes, but for patterns. No names were ever mentioned. But among staff, there was a new phrase, "Don't 12A anyone," meaning, don't assume someone doesn't belong, because you might be looking at the one who signs the checks. Simone never commented. She declined interviews, refused profiles. She didn't want her face on magazine covers. She wanted systems to change without needing her to be visible. Margaret Ellis would later say to her granddaughter, after reading about the merger in a legal digest, "Justice doesn't always walk out the front door with a trophy. Sometimes it just closes a folder and walks away with your whole structure rewritten." And that's exactly what Simone did. She didn't change the world, she changed this world. The one she'd been told wasn't hers. The story didn't end with revenge, or applause, or even a thank you. It ended with rewritten policy, realignment of power, and the quiet awareness that next time someone like Simone walks into a room, the room might just pause, long enough to look again. And for those watching, listening, remembering, especially those who'd been there before, who'd been passed over, looked through, talked around, her story left behind something more powerful than outrage. It left behind proof. Proof that silence isn't surrender, that being underestimated is not the same as being powerless, that justice does not need to announce itself in order to arrive, and that sometimes the most radical act is to remain calm long enough for the truth to do the talking. If this story made you pause, not out of shock but recognition, then type 1 if you've ever been misjudged in silence. Type 2 if you believe quiet dignity still holds power. And if you'd like more stories that restore order, not noise, subscribe and stay with us. We'll keep the light on for voices like yours.